In my last video, I spoke about invocation as a sort of bringing down some mighty God or principle or spirit, bringing it down into the here and now, into oneself. And that's why it's invocation. But I pointed out at the beginning that if you just look up the word in the dictionary, there isn't such a clear distinction of whether it means bringing something down like that, or whether it's bringing something up, like a demon from the depths, or a sort of bringing out a part of yourself, which, strictly in magical terms, that is evocation rather than invocation. And so I've said that for the general public use of the word, there's no difference, but in magical or occult thinking, there is a definite distinction between invoking and evoking. Now, I have very mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, I think it isn't really an important distinction from a theoretical point of view. On the other hand, I do admit it's very important from a practical point of view. So I'm going to be giving sort of both sides of the argument in this video. So let's begin with what exactly is this distinction between out there and in here. And to experience that, I'm just going to make a statement for you to listen to and then think about. Now there's a sort of chaos magic principle which says that nothing is true, everything is permitted. Now I just came up with a variation on that, which was everything is true, nothing needs to be permitted. Who gives the permission? Who do we need permission? So anyway, everything is true, nothing needs permission. Now close your eyes and just think for a moment about what I've said and its implications. Now go a step further and sort of remember me saying it, what I looked like, what I was saying. Just picture that. There I am on the screen in front of you. And now open your eyes. And I assume that you've got a screen in front of you of some sort, so otherwise adapt this. So there in front of you is a screen. How do you know? Because you can see it. There it is. And you have a very clear picture of not only is the screen there, but how far it is away from you. I don't know, 18 inches perhaps. And now you can test that because you could reach out with your hand and feel it. And it is, just as you expect, the right distance away, and it is, the screen is there. And you know the screen is made of glass, and sure enough it feels like glass. Everything's adding up to prove that it really is out there. It really experiences as if your consciousness is actually reaching out to test what it is seeing, finding the reality of it. Now, what about something you can't touch, like the moon? Now, visually, the moon might just be a great big sort of silver disc suspended up in the air and lit up. But you know it isn't. You know that it's a huge distance away and that sort of thing. Even though you can't reach out and touch it to prove that. But you can extend your senses with the telescope and you can look, and it all sort of hangs together, It really does suggest there really is a moon out there, and your mind is sort of reaching out and almost touching it with your mind because you know where it is, you know what it's made of and everything. It's also very vivid and real. And it's so distinctive different from when I told you to close your eyes and think about what I said and even remember the experience. And even though that remembering is sort of out there, you know that actually it's all, you can feel it inside your head. It's a memory. You're not actually looking at it. So that seems like a very clear distinction, a real distinction. But I pointed out in the Is Reality Really Real video that there's something a bit dubious about that. When you open your eyes, there is the screen in front of you. You know it's a screen from your experience and what you've been told. Your eye, because you've got two eyes, can judge the distance. Oh yes, it's about 18 inches away from me. And then your hand can reach and verify that. And therefore, it's all real. But you see, when you see it, what is actually happening is that photons of light are coming from that screen into your eye, which converts that into electrical signals going into your brain. And when you reach out and touch it, what you actually feel is nerves sending electrical signals into the brain. So what have you experienced? Have you experienced, oh yes, there was a sort of influx of electrical signals? No, you haven't. You experience reaching out, touching it, and seeing it. But all it was electrical signals. So what's happened is that your brain has built the experience as a virtual reality. And that's what you were experiencing. Now, the question I raise is, well, yeah, but as long as what the brain gives you is actually the same as what's out there, why not just say it's real? Because it's the same thing. It's what's really out there. And I said, that's fair enough, except you could think of some weird examples. Like, what if a hypnotist convinced you that in front of you was not a screen, but a big rubber tile? And you've seen stage hypnotists can do things like that. A blackboard, let's say a blackboard in front of you. This hypnotist could give you a biro and say, this is a piece of chalk, I would like to write your name on the blackboard. And you would go through the motions of writing on the screen, and you would experience that actually you were writing your name in chalk on a blackboard. Whereas in fact, other people could see you just gesturing in front of a screen. So I pointed out that actually it's the brain is building what it expects to find, and it really is getting verification from the senses, from those electrical signals, but it is actually constructing what it expects to see and adjusting it, which is not quite the same as the sort of reality, the solidity of reality. And so you begin to see why I'm getting a bit shaky about this idea of what is inside and what is outside, because the inner thing you felt is a virtual reality created by the brain. Fair enough, we sort of knew that. But the outer thing that seems so real is also a virtual reality created by the brain. It's actually two aspects of the same virtual reality, the inner bit and the outer bit. The distinction itself is something that the brain has defined. Now, just to add a bit more complication, how do I know that what is actually happening is electrical impulses going up my arm into my brain? Well, I only know that because I've never actually cut open my arm and tested for electric signals. I only know it because other people have told me that. It's something I've learned. And I've learnt it from people who themselves only have a virtual reality. And when they make these tests, it's actually they too are only operating on electrical signals they get from the brain, if that's true. So the whole thing of reality is a sort of circular argument. It's sort of is bootstrapping itself up. So what am I saying? I'm not saying anything radical that, there isn't a reality or anything like that. All I'm saying that this frightfully clear, important distinction between whether something is out there or is in here doesn't really matter from an ontological point of view. It's just, it's a very muddled picture, and you just decide that that the experience feels like out there or it feels like in here. So that's the first part of my thing, is it doesn't really matter. It's not an important distinction. But on the other hand, it is important. It's vital. When people ask me about the Abramelin operation, they say, but is the Holy Guardian Angel something, an objective thing out there that you're bringing into yourself, into your presence? Or is it a sort of higher self? Now this matters because your attitude to getting something out of your brain is very different from calling down something from out there. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, it was very hard to believe in magic and things out there, because it was a very skeptical time. People were much more skeptical then than they are in the 21st century. There was a real belief in solid material world. And that so how could it be possible for anyone to believe in magic or do magic in that world? And the answer was that people like Diane Fortune, W.E. Butler, and Gareth Knight, they were really doing something you call psychological. They were visualizing, closing their eyes, visualizing. They were doing path workings and things. So you could say that they're exploring inner reality. And that doesn't clash with scientists who are exploring outer reality. You're just doing something different, you know. It's a psychological exercise, if you like. And so it was possible to be a practicing magician, doing rituals and things like that, because you really were exploring inner worlds. But when I wrote Sesophomy, the main thing I was saying was that don't underestimate the extent to which your inner beliefs and assumptions and ways of looking at the world don't just affect what you believe about the rest of the world, but actually affect your experience of the rest of the world. In other words, you will actually experience changes in conformity with will, not just imagine them. And that was why Gerard Suster said, this is the book that put the magic back into magic. Because it was saying, you know, yes, you can really bring about change in conformity with will. And this was taken up very much by like the chaos magic current, with the idea of results magic, magic to actually make things happen, not just magic to produce psychological benefits and things like that. And so that became a sort of tough distinction, you know. Are you a real magician who does things, or are you just a psychologist playing with occult psychology? And so the question of, if you're going to do the Abramelin operation, are you calling down a power from out there into your presence, or are you bringing out a part of you, like a superego or something like that? Now, I learnt a lot of my magic from reading Crowley. Now, Crowley himself says on more than one occasion that the Holy Guardian Angel is a part of yourself. It's like your higher self. So really, that's what you're doing, is you're discovering that higher part of yourself. So when I began the operation, was that what I was doing? I spent, you know, up to 3.5 hours a day meditating for 6 months. Was I going inside myself and looking for this part of me that I hadn't contacted before? No. I was reaching out to the Holy Guardian Angel out there. Come to me, my angel. Because, you see, I couldn't have gone on for 6 months just looking inside myself. That would have been so sort of cramped and limited and boring. I couldn't enthuse about that. Whereas the idea that I was bringing down this mighty spiritual being and bringing it down into me, I could infuse myself, I could inflame myself in that. And so I was able to do it for 6 months. Now, I'm not saying the other's impossible. I mean, I think some of the very advanced Buddhist people who, spend their time up in the mountains for years on end, they might be able to just concentrate inward for that time. But I needed to really take the viewpoint that I was calling in things from outside. So the thing is, that's what I mean, is that by practical point of view, it really helps to make that distinction. Now, the last example I gave was the 3-2-1 principle. And that was about addressing the sort of your biggest enemy, if you like. The people out there that make you so angry that you can't really control your anger. You spend all your day thinking what you would like to do to those bastards. And I say, what a waste of time. And this exercise sort of brings you in contact with those people, and you learn something about it in a way that can be quite healing. And I gave the example of, someone who is inflamed with anger about smart-ass intellectuals who say clever things and put you down. And I showed that when it came to the end point, it was rather interesting because you found there was a different relationship to these bastards. And it was easy, looking back at that example, to say, actually, probably what you were really contacting was a sort of dissociated part of yourself. Something that's in you, and you're denying it, and you're projecting it out onto the world. A clue to that would be, go back to what was it you wanted to do to those smart intellectuals? Did you want to go down and follow them down a dark street and stab them in the back? No, probably what you really wanted to do was to come back with the smart, clever response that catches them out and shows them that they aren't really that clever. That's what you probably spend your whole day thinking up. Oh, I wish I'd remember that quote when Plato says the other thing, and then that would really put them in their place. So actually, what's happening is that you too have a smarty, down-putting intellectual in you who wants to put other people down, but you ought to put down those nasty people like yourself. So you see, in that example, it ends up that very likely you are actually calling something out of yourself. Something that you have projected out there, you're actually discovering that is part of yourself. So you see there's two things happening there, which you begin by bringing it in from out there, and then later it may reach the conclusion that actually all along it was something that was in here that I brought out. So again, you see, it's this inner-outer is not really as clear-cut as it seems, and yet, from the point of view of actually working, it really helps to have a clear picture in your mind of whether it's out there or whether it's in here. So, invocation and evocation. I use the word invocation fairly loosely. I wasn't being very strict. I'm just saying it feels like it's out there and it feels like you're bringing it in. But for some people, they would say I was being sloppy, that actually there's a very clear distinction, and that is the distinction between bringing something out or bringing something in. And I think that's it really. What I'm saying is that everything is true and nothing actually needs to be permitted.